The transmission cut out mid-scream, leaving only static across every communication channel in the Galactic Council chambers. Ambassador Nell felt her 3 hearts sink as the last signal from Colony 7 disappeared into silence. That made 3 worlds gone dark in 5 days. 3 million Teruvian souls just vanished. She pressed her thin fingers against the console, watching the holographic display mark another red cross over what had been a thriving settlement just hours ago. The Cravathi Dominion was moving faster than anyone predicted. Their war fleet swept through Teruvian space like a storm of fire and death, and nothing seemed capable of slowing them down. Nell turned to face the assembled representatives from across the galaxy. Dozens of species had gathered for this emergency session, their various forms shifting nervously in their seats. Some had scales, others had fur. A few were made of what looked like living crystal, but despite their differences, they all wore the same expression, fear mixed with relief that the Cravathi had chosen someone else to destroy. "We need military assistance immediately," Nell said, keeping her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. "The Cravathi have broken through our outer defenses. Our people are dying. We have perhaps 2 weeks before they reach our homeworld." The Vorthani representative, a tall being covered in blue feathers, made a gesture of sympathy. "Our hearts break for your suffering, Ambassador. However, our own fleets are committed to protecting our borders. The Cravathi threat extends to many systems, and we must ensure our own survival first." Nell had expected that response, but it still stung. She moved to the next delegate. "What about the Quilara Collective? Your species has the 3rd largest fleet in the Council." A crystalline being chimed softly, its voice translating through the chamber speakers. "We offer our prayers and positive energy to your people during this difficult time. However, our religious laws prevent us from engaging in warfare. We can send medical supplies and food, but no warships." "Medical supplies won't stop orbital bombardment," Nell snapped, her usual diplomatic composure cracking. "Food won't protect refugees when Cravathi soldiers come to drag them into slave camps." She went down the line, asking each species for help. The Hestian Confederation offered condolences but cited their pacifist constitution. The Drell Empire claimed their fleets were undergoing maintenance. The Corvin League suggested forming a committee to study the situation. Every answer was a variation of the same theme. Thoughts and prayers, sympathy and sadness, but no ships and no soldiers. Nell felt hollow. Her people had been members of the Galactic Council for over 4,000 years. They had shared technology freely, hosted diplomatic summits, contributed to scientific research that benefited everyone. The Teruvians had always believed that civilization meant helping each other, that belonging to the Council meant security. Now she understood the truth. When death came calling, every species looked after themselves first. The chamber began to empty as representatives made excuses to leave. Nell stood alone at her station, staring at the star map. The red marks indicating Cravathi fleet movements were spreading like a disease across her people's territory. Soon those marks would reach Teruvia itself, and then everything her species had built over millennia would burn. "There is one more option," her aide whispered, approaching carefully. His name was Wren, and he had served in the diplomatic corps for 30 years. "We haven't contacted the humans yet." Nell almost laughed. "The humans? They've been part of the Council for barely 15 years. Their homeworld is on the other side of the galaxy. What could they possibly do?" "Probably nothing," Wren admitted. "But every other species has refused us. What do we have to lose?" He was right, of course. Pride meant nothing when your entire civilization faced extinction. Nell accessed the communication system and searched for Earth's diplomatic frequency. She had met the human ambassador briefly at a cultural exchange 5 years ago. They seemed pleasant enough, if a bit primitive by galactic standards. Their planet was classified as a death world, with extreme weather and dangerous predators. Most species considered it impressive that humans had achieved space travel at all. The channel connected. A human face appeared on the screen, female with dark hair and steady eyes. She wore some kind of military uniform with insignia Nell didn't recognize. "This is Admiral Claire Wong of the Earth Defense Coalition. How can we help you, Ambassador Nell?" The fact that the human remembered her name was surprising. The fact that a military officer answered the diplomatic channel was even more unusual. Nell quickly explained the situation, describing the Cravathi attacks and the Council's refusal to assist. She tried to keep the desperation out of her voice, but failed. When she finished, Silence stretched across the light years between them. Nell waited for another polite rejection, another expression of sympathy with no substance behind it. She began composing her next message in her head, perhaps to some of the independent systems that existed outside Council authority. Then Admiral Wong spoke, and her words were simple and direct. "We're on our way. Hold the line." The transmission ended. Nell stared at the blank screen, unsure if she had heard correctly. Ren moved beside her, his eyes wide. "Did she just say what I think she said?" he asked. "I don't know," Nell whispered. Maybe it was a translation error. But even as she said it, new data began appearing on their tactical displays. Deep space sensors detected multiple faster-than-light signatures emerging from the direction of human space. Not one or two ships, but dozens. Then hundreds. The sensor operators in the Teruvian Defense Command started sending confused reports. An entire fleet was moving through their space, heading straight for the inner colonies. Nell pulled up the identification data. Every ship registered as human. Every single one. They had come from Earth, from humanity's other colonies, from military stations she didn't even know existed. The fleet composition scrolled across her screen. Carriers, destroyers, cruisers, support vessels. Over 200 warships total. How did they respond so fast? Ren breathed. "We only just called them." Nell didn't have an answer. Later, she would learn that human fleets maintained something called rapid response groups, always ready to deploy within hours. Later, she would understand that humans had watched the Cravathi advance with growing concern and had already prepared for this moment. But right now, all she knew was that someone had finally answered their call for help. "Contact our defense forces," she ordered, feeling hope for the first time in days. "Tell them reinforcements are coming. Tell them to hold the colonies for 6 more days. And if they ask who's coming to save us," Ren asked. Nell looked at the fleet markers on her display, at the hundreds of human warships racing across the stars toward a people they barely knew, toward a war that wasn't theirs to fight. "Tell them the humans are coming," she said. "Tell them we're not alone anymore." 6 days of waiting felt like 6 years. Nell watched from the orbital command center as refugee ships continued streaming in from the outer colonies, packed with families who had lost everything. The Cravathi advance had slowed slightly, but only because they were busy stripping the conquered worlds of resources and establishing occupation forces. Soon they would move again, and then nothing would stand between them and Teruvia itself. The defense coordinator, an older Teruvian named Hess, approached with another troubling report. "Our last military outpost at Kelvis Station reports Cravathi scouts in their sector. The main invasion fleet can't be far behind." Nell nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The Teruvian Defense Force consisted of maybe 50 lightly armed patrol ships designed to stop pirates and smugglers, not military conquest. Against the Cravathi war machine, they might as well be throwing rocks at a hurricane. Then every sensor in the command center lit up at once. Alarms chimed as the deep space detection grid registered massive spatial distortions at the edge of the system. Ships were dropping out of faster-than-light travel, lots of them. "Cravathi?" Hess asked, his voice tight. A sensor operator shook her head, her hands dancing across the controls. "Negative. The signatures are different. These are the ships from Earth. The human fleet has arrived." Nell rushed to the main display and felt her breath catch. She had seen the numbers and reports, knew that 200 human vessels were coming, but seeing them was entirely different. The warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls bristling with weapons and armor plating. They moved with precise coordination, spreading out to establish a defensive perimeter around the inner colonies. The largest ship, a massive carrier that dwarfed anything in the Teruvian fleet, transmitted identification codes. EST Defiant, the flagship. Within minutes, Nell received a message requesting her presence aboard the human vessel for a tactical briefing. She took a shuttle across space, watching the human warships slide past her viewport. Up close, they looked even more intimidating. Every surface seemed designed for war, covered in weapon emplacements, armored plating, and sensor arrays. These were not exploration vessels or science ships. These were tools built specifically for combat. The Defiant's hangar bay could have held Nell's entire shuttle 3 times over. Human crew members in dark uniforms guided her through corridors that hummed with power. Everything looked efficient and functional, with none of the artistic decoration that Teruvian ships featured. Finally, she reached a large room filled with holographic displays and tactical stations. Admiral Wong stood at the center, studying a 3-dimensional map of the system. She was younger than Nell expected, perhaps only 40 years old in human terms, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When she turned to greet Nell, her handshake was firm. "Ambassador, thank you for coming. We need to coordinate our defense strategy immediately." Nell gestured at the surrounding displays. "Admiral, I must confess I'm shocked by your response. When I sent that message, I hoped for perhaps a small task force. Instead, you brought a full battle fleet. You asked for help," Wong said simply. "We don't do things halfway. Now let's discuss the Cravathi threat assessment." Over the next hour, Nell learned things about humanity that the Council had never fully understood. Wong explained that Earth had only recently emerged from centuries of global conflicts. Humans had been fighting each other with increasingly deadly weapons for their entire history. War wasn't something they studied academically. It was embedded in their culture, their thinking, their instincts. "We come from a harsh world," Wong explained, pulling up images of Earth. Extreme weather, deadly predators, diseases that killed millions. Survival meant becoming the most dangerous thing on our planet. We learned to hunt, to fight, to protect our own. Those instincts don't go away just because we reach the stars. A tactical officer interrupted with new intelligence. "Admiral, Cravathi fleet movements confirm they're massing for an assault on Kelvis Station. 300 warships, standard Dominion battle formation." Wong studied the data without any visible concern. "Good, that's where we'll hit them." Nell felt confused. "Hit them?" "Admiral, they outnumber your fleet. Surely a defensive posture would be wiser." "Defense is important," Wong agreed, "but the Cravathi need to learn that attacking your people carries a price. We're going to teach them that lesson at Kelvis." She began issuing orders, and Nell watched in fascination as the human fleet rearranged itself. Wong explained the plan using terms Nell had never heard before. Ambush tactics, concentrated fire patterns, electronic warfare, kinetic kill vehicles. The humans had clearly spent their entire history perfecting the art of destroying each other. And now they were applying those brutal lessons to protect someone else. "Why are you doing this?" Nell finally asked. "Your people don't know us. Earth is so far from here. What do you gain by risking your lives in our war?" Wong was quiet for a moment, then pulled up an image from Earth's history. It showed humans in old-fashioned military uniforms, standing among ruins. A few hundred years ago, one group of humans tried to exterminate another group. Millions died before the rest of humanity intervened. We learned something important from that darkness. Evil wins when good people do nothing. Genocide succeeds when everyone looks away. She met Nell's eyes directly. "You called for help and everyone ignored you. Every species in the Council had reasons why they couldn't act. Good reasons, probably. But reasons don't stop genocide. Action stops genocide. So we came," a communication officer called out. "Admiral, all battle groups report ready. We can move on Kelvis Station within the hour." "Execute the deployment," Wong ordered. Then she turned back to Nell. "Ambassador, I want you to return to your command center. What happens next is going to be violent. We're going to engage the Cravathi fleet in direct combat. Many of them will die. Some of us will die. War isn't clean or noble, despite what stories say. But it's necessary." Nell wanted to protest, to suggest negotiations or peaceful solutions, but she had already tried those options. The Cravathi didn't negotiate. They conquered. Sometimes the only answer to violence was greater violence, and humanity seemed to understand that in ways her peaceful people never had. She returned to her shuttle and headed back to the Teruvian command center. Through the viewport, she watched the human fleet begin moving toward Kelvis Station. The warships accelerated with purpose, their formations tight and professional. These were not diplomats or scientists playing at war. These were warriors who had spent their entire existence learning how to fight and win. Back at the command center, Hess approached with wide eyes. "The humans are moving to intercept the Cravathi fleet." "Nell, this is madness. They're outnumbered." "I know," Nell said quietly, watching the tactical display. "But they came anyway." The human fleet disappeared from their sensors as it moved beyond detection range, heading toward Kelvis Station and the waiting Cravathi armada. Nell sat down at her station and waited. In a few hours, she would know if humanity's confidence was justified, or if she had just witnessed 200 human ships sail off to their destruction. Either way, the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. General Vrakis of the Cravathi Dominion reviewed the invasion reports with satisfaction. 3 Teruvian colonies conquered in less than a week with minimal losses to his forces. The Teruvians fought with the desperation of prey animals, all panic and no strategy. Their ships were laughably weak, their soldiers untrained in real combat. This conquest would be complete within a month, adding another species to the Dominion's empire. He stood in the command center of his flagship, the Warbringer, surrounded by tactical displays showing the approach to Kelvis Station. 300 Cravathi warships moved in standard formation, more than enough to overwhelm the station's pathetic defenses. After Kelvis fell, nothing would protect the Teruvian homeworld. Then the real work would begin, breaking their population into useful slave labor. General, we're detecting unusual readings near the asteroid field, his sensor officer reported. Could be interference from the mineral deposits. Vracus waved dismissively. Maintain course. The Teruvians are probably hiding some civilian ships there. We'll deal with them after securing the station. The Cravathi fleet continued forward, closing to within weapons range of Kelvis. Vracus prepared to give the bombardment order. Then everything went wrong at once. The asteroid field exploded with activity. Ships appeared from nowhere, dozens of them, their weapons already firing. The first volley of missiles struck the Cravathi forward screen before anyone could react. 3 destroyers vanished in blooms of nuclear fire. A 4th took a direct hit to its engines and went spinning out of formation. Ambush, someone screamed across the command channel. Unknown fleet attacking from multiple vectors. Vracus grabbed his tactical console, trying to make sense of the chaos. The attacking ships moved with frightening speed and precision, darting between the larger Cravathi vessels like predators. Their weapons were unlike anything he had seen before, combining missiles, energy weapons, and solid projectiles in coordinated strikes that targeted specific ship systems. Who are they? Vracus demanded. Where did they come from? His intelligence officer pulled up identification data, his face going pale. They're transmitting Earth Defense Coalition codes. General, these are human ships. Humans. Vracus had heard of Earth but knew almost nothing about them. Some primitive species that joined the Galactic Council recently. They couldn't possibly threaten the Dominion. How many ships? 200, sir. And they're fighting like nothing I've ever seen. Vracus watched the battle unfold with growing disbelief. The humans fought with aggressive coordination, their formations constantly shifting to maintain tactical advantage. They used the asteroids as cover, emerging to strike and then disappearing again before the Cravathi could return effective fire. Their ships absorbed damage that should have crippled them and kept fighting. One human destroyer, smaller than most Cravathi vessels, charged directly at a Cravathi cruiser. The cruiser's weapons tore into the destroyer's hull, ripping through armor and venting atmosphere, but the human ship never changed course. At the last second, it fired a full spread of missiles at point-blank range, directly into the cruiser's bridge. Both ships died in the resulting explosion. They're insane, Vracus muttered. They fight like they don't fear death. The battle spread across space around Kelvis Station. Human fighter craft swarmed from their carriers, piloted by individuals who flew with reckless skill. They targeted Cravathi weapons emplacements and engine clusters, crippling ships that the larger human vessels could then destroy. The Cravathi tried to reform their battle lines, but the humans refused to fight a conventional engagement. Admiral Wong's voice crackled across all frequencies in clear galactic standard. Cravathi forces, this is Admiral Wong of the Earth Defense Coalition. You are attacking civilians under our protection. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. Vracus laughed harshly. Respond with full bombardment of that carrier. Show these primitives what real military power looks like. 50 Cravathi ships focused their weapons on the Defiant. Energy beams and missiles converged on the human flagship from multiple angles. Surely nothing could survive that firepower. But the Defiant was already moving, its engines burning at maximum power. Point defense systems activated, shooting down incoming missiles. Energy shields, more advanced than anything the Cravathi possessed, absorbed the beam weapons. The carrier took damage, whole sections of its hull glowing red from heat, but it survived. Then it returned fire with its own massive weapons arrays. The human capital ship's broadside tore through 3 Cravathi destroyers. The precision was terrifying. Wong wasn't just shooting, she was surgically removing pieces from his fleet. All ships concentrate fire on the human flagship, Vracus ordered. Bring it down! What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for years to come. The human fleet moved to protect their flagship, forming a defensive screen that absorbed the Cravathi assault. Ships took damage meant for the Defiant. their crews sacrificing themselves to protect their command vessel. One destroyer, the Relentless, positioned itself directly in the path of a Cravathi dreadnought's main weapon. The beam punched through the Relentless from bow to stern, killing everyone aboard in seconds. But it gave the rest of the human fleet time to eliminate the dreadnought with concentrated missile fire. Vrachis realized with cold certainty that he was losing. The humans were outnumbered but fighting with the kind of coordinated ferocity that his forces couldn't match. Every Cravathi tactical advantage was being countered by human adaptability. They anticipated his moves, exploited every weakness, and refused to break no matter how much damage they took. "General, we've lost 90 ships," his tactical officer reported. "Enemy losses are estimated at 40 vessels, 90 ships." In less than an hour, these humans had destroyed nearly a third of his invasion force. Vrachis looked at the battle display and saw his formations falling apart. The Cravathi Dominion had conquered dozens of species over centuries, but none of them fought like this. None of them came from deathworlds where survival meant becoming the most dangerous predator in the ecosystem. A massive explosion lit up the tactical display as another Cravathi ship died. Then another. The humans were systematically dismantling his fleet. "General, multiple ships are requesting permission to withdraw," his communication officer said quietly. Vrachis wanted to refuse, to order his forces to fight to the last ship. The Dominion did not retreat, but he also recognized reality. If he stayed, the humans would destroy his entire fleet. Better to withdraw and regroup than lose everything in a pointless last stand. "All ships execute emergency jump to rally point 7, he ordered, hating every word. "We're withdrawing." The remaining Cravathi vessels turned away from the battle, their faster-than-light drives charging. Human ships pursued, taking shots at the fleeing vessels, but Wong eventually ordered them to break off. She had achieved her objective. Kelvis Station was saved. As the Warbringer jumped to safety, Vrachis pulled up everything his intelligence division had on Earth and humanity. Deathworld classification, history of constant warfare, apex predator psychology. How had the Galactic Council let these people join without understanding what they were? The Cravathi Dominion had spent centuries building their reputation as unstoppable conquerors. In a single afternoon, an unknown species called humanity had shattered that reputation. Vrachis knew the Dominion would not let this stand. They would gather their forces and return with overwhelming numbers, but as he reviewed footage of human ships fighting with suicidal courage to protect people they barely knew, Vrachis felt something he had never experienced before in his military career: doubt. The Galactic Council chamber erupted in chaos the moment the battle footage ended. Representatives from 50 different species shouted over each other, some in fear and others in anger. The holographic display froze on the final image of Cravathi ships fleeing from human forces, a sight no one had witnessed in living memory. The Vorthani representative stood, his blue feathers ruffling with agitation. "This is exactly what I warned about when humanity joined the Council. They are too aggressive, too willing to resort to violence. Look at how they fight." "It's barbaric," a Quilara delegate chimed in agreement. "The humans destroyed over 100 Cravathi vessels. The loss of life is staggering. There must be consequences for such excessive force." Nell rose from her seat, her voice cutting through the noise. "Excessive force? The Cravathi invaded my people's worlds, killed millions, and enslaved entire populations. The humans stopped them when every single one of you refused to help. Where were your concerns about loss of life when the Teruvians were dying?" "That's different," the Vorthani countered. "We offered diplomatic solutions." "Your diplomatic solutions left my colonies burning," Nell snapped. "Human worship saved them. I will not stand here and listen to you criticize the only species that answered our call." The council moderator, an ancient being from a neutral system, tried to restore order. "Regardless of motives, the fact remains that humanity has demonstrated military capabilities far beyond what we understood. The council must address this discrepancy." More arguments followed. Some species wanted restrictions placed on human fleet movements. Others suggested mandatory weapons inspections of Earth's military installations. A few even proposed suspending humanity's council membership until they agreed to reduce their armed forces. Through it all, the human ambassador sat quietly in her designated seat. Her name was Helen Rodriguez, and she had represented Earth's interests at the council for 3 years. She listened to every accusation and suggestion with a neutral expression, occasionally making notes on her data pad. Finally, the moderator called on her to respond. Rodriguez stood, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. "The council is afraid," she said simply. "I understand that. You watched footage of human warships engaging in combat and it scared you. Good. It should scare you. Do you know what scares me? The fact that 3 Teruvian colonies were destroyed, millions died, and not one council species lifted a finger to stop it." She activated her own holographic display, showing maps of Cravathi conquests over the past century, 23 species conquered or exterminated. The Dominion has killed billions of sentient beings, enslaved countless more, and the Council's response has been to issue strongly worded statements and economic sanctions that never work. You've created a galaxy where aggressors face no consequences, because no one wants to risk their own people to stop them. The Vorthani representative interrupted. "We are a civilized society. We resolve conflicts through dialogue." "The Cravathi don't dialogue," Rodriguez shot back. "They conquer, and they'll keep conquering until someone stops them with force. You call us barbaric for fighting, but you know what's truly barbaric? Watching genocide happen and doing nothing because fighting might be uncomfortable." She pulled up casualty reports from the Battle of Kelvis Station. "Yes, we destroyed many Cravathi ships. We also lost 14 vessels and over 2,000 personnel. 2,000 humans died defending people they had never met, protecting a world that most of Earth's population couldn't find on a star chart. They died because we believe that when someone calls for help, you answer. That's not barbarism. That's honor." The chamber fell quiet. Rodriguez let her words sink in before continuing. "Earth doesn't want to be the galaxy's police force. We don't want to fight your wars. But we will not stand by and watch innocent people suffer when we have the power to help them. If that makes us too aggressive for the Council, then maybe we shouldn't be here." Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The moderator received an urgent message and his expression grew grim. "We're receiving reports from multiple intelligence sources. The Cravathi Dominion is assembling a retaliation fleet. Over 800 warships gathering at their staging grounds. Their target is the Taruvian homeworld." The announcement sent fresh waves of panic through the chamber. 800 ships was an armada larger than anything the Cravathi had deployed in decades. It was a force designed not just to conquer but to completely annihilate. Nell felt her hearts racing. "When will they arrive?" "Intelligence estimates 2 weeks," the moderator replied. "Perhaps less." Rodriguez was already on her communication device, speaking rapidly in English to someone on Earth. When she finished, she looked directly at Nell. "Ambassador, Earth is committing additional forces to Teruvia's defense. We're sending 3 more battle groups immediately. That will still leave you outnumbered 2-1, the Vorthani representative pointed out. "Even your forces cannot overcome such odds." "Maybe not," Rodriguez admitted. "But we're going to try anyway." Over the next several hours, Nell watched the political landscape shift. The Council continued debating restrictions on human military power, but their words felt hollow now. Everyone knew that humanity's fleets were the only thing standing between the Teruvians and extinction. Some species began quietly approaching Earth with defense proposals. The Drell Empire offered to sell weapons and supplies to human forces. The Corvin League suggested joint military exercises. Even the Vorthani grudgingly offered access to their sensor networks along the frontier. They were afraid of human military strength, Nell realized, but they were more afraid of what would happen if that strength disappeared. The Cravathi Dominion had grown bold because no one opposed them. Now humanity had bloodied their nose, and every species in the galaxy was watching to see what happened next. Rodriguez found Nell after the session ended. "Ambassador, I need you to understand something. Earth's government had a long debate about sending more forces. Some people argued we should cut our losses and withdraw. Others said we've done enough already." "But you're sending reinforcements anyway," Nell said. "Yes, because in the end we couldn't live with ourselves if we abandoned you now. The Teruvian people put their trust in us. Human soldiers died protecting your worlds. That creates a bond, an obligation. We don't break our promises and we don't abandon our friends." Friends. The word hit Nell harder than she expected. 2 weeks ago, humans were barely acquaintances, a distant species known only through occasional diplomatic meetings. Now they were friends willing to die for her people. "What happens if the Cravathi defeat you?" Nell asked quietly. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Then they'll learn that defeating Earth is very different from defeating humanity. We're stubborn creatures, Ambassador. We don't surrender, we don't give up, and we have long memories. If the Cravathi want a war with humanity, they're going to get one they'll regret. News of the impending Cravathi assault spread through both Teruvian and human space. On Earth, volunteers flooded recruitment centers, wanting to join the fleets heading to defend an alien world. On Teruvia, the population watched the skies and hoped that their unexpected human allies would somehow prevail against impossible odds. Admiral Wong received her reinforcements within days. The carriers Indomitable, Thunderchild, and Vengeance arrived with their support fleets, bringing humanity's total force to 350 warships. Still outnumbered, but no longer overwhelmingly so, Wong began preparations for what military historians would later call the largest space battle in recorded history. She studied Cravathi tactics, planned defensive positions, and coordinated with the Teruvian Defense Force. Every ship was loaded with maximum ammunition. Every crew member drilled on emergency procedures. Everyone knew what was coming. Nell stood in the orbital command center watching human ships take up positions around her homeworld. Despite everything, despite the odds, she felt hope. Because when the Cravathi came, they wouldn't be facing a helpless prey species. They would be facing humanity, and humanity never learned how to quit. Overlord Kreth stared at the viewing screen from his personal chambers aboard the super dreadnought Worldbreaker. The massive warship led a fleet of 800 Cravathi vessels, the largest armada the Dominion had assembled in 50 years. Every captain had been handpicked. Every ship carried maximum weapons loads. This would not be another embarrassing defeat like Kelvis Station. "We arrive at the Teruvian homeworld in 6 hours, his second-in-command reported. Long-range sensors confirm human fleet presence, approximately 350 vessels in defensive formation. Kreth allowed himself a thin smile. They came back. Good. I want to destroy them utterly, make an example that will echo across the galaxy. No one defies the Cravathi Dominion. The battle plan was simple and brutal. The Cravathi fleet would emerge from faster-than-light travel in multiple groups, surrounding the human defensive positions. Then they would advance from all sides simultaneously, using their numerical superiority to overwhelm the humans through pure firepower. Kreth didn't care about tactical elegance. He wanted the humans crushed. As the fleet approached Teruvia, Kreth reviewed intelligence reports on humanity. Their homeworld Earth was remarkably hostile, with extreme weather patterns and dangerous wildlife. They had spent most of their history fighting each other in increasingly destructive wars. They possessed a psychological profile that military analysts described as aggressive, territorial, and highly resistant to intimidation. Troubling, but ultimately irrelevant. Numbers would decide this battle, and the Cravathi had overwhelming numerical advantage. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect coordination, surrounding Teruvia in a massive sphere formation. Kreth immediately spotted the human defensive positions. They had arranged their ships in layered groups around the planet, using the moon and orbital structures as strategic anchors. It was the intelligent deployment, but doomed. All ships advance, Kreth commanded. Maintain formation and prepare for engagement. 800 Cravathi warships began moving inward, weapons charging. The humans responded by adjusting their own formations, but they didn't retreat or show any signs of panic. Kreth found that interesting. Most species broke when faced with such overwhelming odds. Humans apparently needed to learn that lesson the hard way. The two fleets closed to weapons range and hell erupted in the vacuum of space. Cravathi ships opened fire from every direction, filling space with energy beams, missiles, and kinetic projectiles. The volume of fire was staggering, enough to vaporize a small moon. Human point defense systems activated immediately, shooting down missiles and deflecting some of the incoming fire, but nothing could stop it all. Several human ships took catastrophic damage in the first minutes, their hulls rupturing under the assault. But instead of breaking formation, the surviving vessels moved to fill the gaps. They returned fire with disciplined volleys, targeting Cravathi engines and weapons systems with frightening accuracy. The battle rapidly spread across thousands of kilometers of space. Kreth watched from the Worldbreaker as his forces pressed inward, expecting the human lines to collapse under pressure. Instead, the humans fought with the same desperate ferocity they had shown at Kelvis, but now magnified across the entire fleet. Human fighter craft launched in waves. Thousands of small attack ships that swarmed the larger Cravathi vessels. The pilots flew with reckless skill, dodging defensive fire to strike at vulnerable systems. Kreth saw one human fighter deliberately ram itself into a Cravathi cruiser's bridge when its weapons ran empty. "They're not fighting to win," his tactical officer observed. "They're fighting to hurt us as much as possible before they die." But the humans weren't dying as quickly as they should. Their ships absorbed enormous damage and kept functioning. Their crews performed repairs under fire, rerouting power and patching holes while weapons blazed around them. One destroyer lost half its hull to a direct hit, but continued fighting with its remaining weapons until a second strike finally destroyed it. Hours passed. The battle became a grinding slugfest with neither side giving ground. The Cravathi lost ships steadily to precise human fire. The humans lost ships to overwhelming Cravathi numbers. Space filled with debris and the expanding clouds of atmosphere from breached hulls. Kreth grew frustrated. His forces had destroyed over 100 human vessels, but the cost was staggering. Nearly 200 Cravathi ships were gone, far more than predicted. The humans were making them pay for every meter of space. Admiral Wong's carrier, the Defiant, became the focus of intense Cravathi attention. Kreth ordered 50 ships to concentrate their fire on the human flagship, determined to break the enemy's command structure. Missiles and energy beams converged on the carrier from multiple angles. The Defiant was already heavily damaged from earlier fighting, its hull scored by weapons fire and sections exposed to vacuum. But Wong didn't retreat. She maneuvered her damaged carrier to maintain optimal firing positions, her weapons crews working with machine-like efficiency to return fire. Then something happened that Kreth would never forget. A human destroyer, the Courageous, deliberately positioned itself between the World Breaker and the Defiant. The destroyer was tiny compared to his super dreadnought, barely a quarter of its size. Kreth ordered his main weapon fired. The massive energy beam was designed to punch through planetary shields. It struck the Courageous dead center, burning completely through the ship from bow to stern. The destroyer's reactor went critical, turning the vessel into a brief sun that consumed its entire crew. But the sacrifice gave the rest of the human fleet precious seconds to reposition. And it gave Wong time to do something unprecedented. The Defiant launched its entire remaining fighter wing, over 200 attack craft, straight at the World Breaker. Kreth's defensive systems destroyed most of them, but nearly 50 fighters made it through. They swarmed his flagship like angry insects, targeting sensors, weapons emplacements, and engine clusters. One pilot guided her crippled fighter directly into the World Breaker's main hangar bay, the explosion triggering secondary blasts that tore through 3 decks. The World Breaker shuddered under the assault. Damage reports flooded in from every section. Fires raged in the lower decks. The main reactor was destabilizing. Kreth realized with shock that his flagship was dying, killed by a swarm of tiny human attack ships piloted by individuals who traded their lives for strategic damage. "Overlord, we must evacuate," his second urged. Kreth wanted to refuse, to go down fighting as befitted a Cravathi warrior, but he was also a realist. His death wouldn't change the battle's outcome, and the Dominion needed leadership. He transferred his flag to another vessel and watched the World Breaker begin its death spiral toward Teruvia's atmosphere. Around him, the battle continued with undiminished fury. Both fleets were battered wrecks now, barely half their original strength remaining, but neither side would surrender. Then Kreth saw something that made his blood run cold. Despite everything, despite losing over half their ships, despite damage that would have broken any other species, the human fleet was still maintaining formation, still protecting Teruvia, still fighting. They weren't going to quit. Even if it cost them every ship and every life, they would keep fighting until the Cravathi withdrew, or until no humans remained alive. Kreth looked at his tactical display. His forces had lost over 400 ships. The humans were down to barely 130 combat-capable vessels. By the numbers, the Cravathi were still winning. But Kreth understood something that numbers couldn't capture. The humans had already won because they had proven they couldn't be beaten. Not really. You could destroy their ships, kill their crews, but you couldn't make them surrender or retreat. And if the Cravathi stayed and ground down the last human vessel, what then? Earth would send more fleets. This war would never end. "All ships," Kreth said quietly, the words tasting like poison. "Withdraw to rally point. We're leaving." His officers stared at him in shock. The Cravathi Dominion did not retreat. They had never retreated, But Kreth looked at the debris field around Teruvia, at the burning wrecks of hundreds of ships from both sides, and made his decision. The Krivathi fleet broke off and began jumping away. The humans didn't pursue. They couldn't, not in their damaged state, but they had held. Against impossible odds, they had held. As his ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, Kreth took one last look at Teruvia. The humans had saved it, but at a terrible cost. And somewhere on that planet, the species called Teruvians would remember forever that when everyone else abandoned them, humanity stood and fought. The silence after battle felt heavier than the fighting itself. Nell stood at the observation window of the orbital command center, watching rescue ships move through the debris field that surrounded Teruvia. Pieces of destroyed vessels, both human and Krivathi, drifted in slow orbits. Each piece represented lives lost, dreams ended, futures erased. 3 months had passed since the Second Battle of Teruvia, as historians were calling it. 3 months of cleanup, repair, and mourning. The final casualty count had been devastating. Humanity lost 220 ships and over 15,000 personnel. The Krivathi suffered even worse, with nearly 500 vessels destroyed and casualties estimated in the hundreds of thousands. But Teruvia still stood. The Teruvian people still lived, and that made all the difference. Hess approached quietly, carrying a datapad with the latest reports. The last of the refugee camps have been closed. People are returning to the surviving colonies. It will take years to rebuild, but we're alive to do it. Thanks to them, Nell said, gesturing at the human ships still stationed around the planet. The fleet was much smaller now, with most vessels returned to Earth for repairs or decommissioning. But Admiral Wong had kept a battle group permanently stationed in Teruvian space, a promise that the Krivathi would never catch them unprepared again. The Galactic Council session begins in an hour, Hess reminded her. They're voting on humanity's status. Nell nodded and prepared for the meeting. This would be the most important council session in decades, deciding not just humanity's role but the entire galaxy's future. The council chamber was packed when she arrived. Every species had sent representatives, and the gallery was filled with observers. The tension was obvious. Everyone knew what was at stake. The moderator called the session to order and immediately addressed the primary issue. The council must decide how to respond to recent events. The Krivathi Dominion has submitted a formal request for peace negotiations, their first such request in over a century. They are offering to release all enslaved populations, pay reparations to conquered worlds, and reduce their military forces to defensive levels only. Murmurs spread through the chamber. The Krivathi surrender was unprecedented. The Dominion had been the galaxy's terror for generations, and now they were suing for peace because one species had proven willing to fight them. The question before us, the moderator continued, is how to integrate humanity into the Council's security structure. Several proposals have been submitted. The Vorthani representative stood first. Humanity has demonstrated capabilities that concern many Council members. We propose that Earth agree to limits on fleet sizes and weapons development in exchange for a seat on the Council's Military Oversight Committee. Rodriguez rose smoothly from the human delegation. Earth declines. We didn't save the Teruvians so we could be rewarded with restrictions and oversight. We helped because it was the right thing to do, and will continue helping whoever needs it regardless of Council politics. You can't operate as an independent military force within Council space, another representative argued. There must be accountability. We're already accountable, Rodriguez countered. To our own people, to our values, and to the species we defend. The Council had its chance to stop the Krivathi. You chose not to act. Don't lecture us about responsibility when your diplomacy failed and our people died fixing your problems. Nell watched the debate spiral, then stood and requested recognition. The moderator granted it immediately. The Council is asking the wrong question, she said. You're focused on controlling humanity, on limiting their power. But I was there. I watched human ships die protecting my world. I met the crews who knew they might not survive but came anyway. The question isn't how to control them. It's how to be worthy of them. She pulled up images from the battle, showing human ships positioning themselves as shields, fighters ramming enemy vessels, crews working to save Teruvian civilians even as their own ships burned around them. Humanity doesn't need Council oversight because they already police themselves better than we ever could. They have something most of us lost millennia ago. They remember that power without purpose is tyranny, but purpose without power is meaningless. They have both. The chamber fell quiet as Nell continued. I propose that instead of restricting Earth, we establish a mutual defense alliance. Any council member facing existential threat can request human military assistance. In exchange, we offer Earth full access to our technology, trade networks, and diplomatic resources. Not as subordinates, but as equals. That would make humanity the galaxy's military force, the Vorthani protested. No single species should have that much influence. Then maybe more species should be willing to fight, Rodriguez said bluntly. Earth doesn't want to be the galaxy's only defenders. We'd love for others to step up. But until they do, we're not going to apologize for being capable of protecting innocent lives. The vote took hours. Various species proposed amendments, restrictions, and conditions. But in the end, the result was clear. By a significant majority, the Council approved a formal alliance with humanity. Not as overseers or controllers, but as partners. Several other species immediately approached Earth with similar bilateral defense agreements. The Drell Empire offered joint ship production facilities. The Corvin League proposed combined fleet exercises. Even the Vorthani quietly inquired about defensive arrangements for their frontier systems. The galaxy was changing, Nell realized. For thousands of years, Council species had believed that civilization meant avoiding conflict, that being advanced meant being peaceful. Humanity proved that real civilization meant being willing to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. 3 days after the Council vote, a ceremony took place on Teruvia's surface. In the capital city's central plaza, where 100,000 Teruvians could gather, a memorial was unveiled. It was a simple structure of polished stone, listing the names of every human who died defending their world. Admiral Wong attended, along with survivors from the fleet. Nell gave a speech that was broadcast across the galaxy, her words carefully chosen. We waited for allies when the darkness came. We called for help and heard only silence from those we thought were friends. Then humanity answered, not with words but with action. They sent their fleets, their best people, and many never returned home. This memorial ensures we will never forget their sacrifice. It reminds us that in our darkest hour, when all hope seemed lost, humanity stood with us. She paused, looking at the human personnel in the crowd. But this memorial is also a promise that the Teruvian people will never again stand silent when others face extinction. A promise that we learned from humanity's example, because they didn't just save our lives. They taught us what it truly means to be part of a galactic community. Wong was invited to speak but kept her remarks brief. We didn't come here expecting gratitude or monuments. We came because you needed help. That's what we do. Earth has learned through hard experience that evil succeeds when good people do nothing. So we do something, always. After the ceremony, Nell found Wong standing alone near the memorial, running her fingers over the carved names. Do you regret it? Nell asked quietly. All those lives lost for a people you barely knew? Wong was silent for a long moment. Every name here is someone who won't go home to their family. Someone whose future ended in fire and vacuum. How could I not have regrets? She turned to face Nell. But if you're asking whether it was worth it, whether I'd make the same choice again, the answer is yes. Every single time. Why? Nell needed to understand. Your people sacrifice so much for others. What drives that? Because we remember what it's like to need help and not receive it, Wong said. Earth's history is full of genocides that happened while others looked away. We learned that being able to help creates an obligation to help. Power without compassion is monstrous. We refuse to be monsters. A young Teruvian child approached carrying a flower. She looked up at Wong with wide eyes and offered it shyly. Wong knelt down, accepted the flower, and said something in the child's language that made her smile. Nell watched the interaction and understood. This was why humanity fought. Not for glory or territory or resources. They fought so that children could grow up safe, so that families could live without fear, so that civilizations could thrive instead of burn. 6 months later, Nell received a message from the far side of the galaxy. Another species was facing aggression from a hostile neighbor. They had called the Galactic Council for help and received the usual promises of diplomatic intervention. Then they had done something new. They had called Earth directly. The response came within hours, transmitted by Ambassador Rodriguez. We're on our way. Hold the line. Nell smiled as she filed the report. The galaxy was learning. When you needed empty words in diplomatic theater, call the council. But when you needed someone who would actually stand and fight beside you, when you needed someone who understood that protecting the innocent was worth dying for, you called humanity. They waited for allies. But humanity sent something far more valuable. They sent hope. They sent proof that in the vast darkness of space someone would always answer the call, and that made all the difference.